Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege to be here with Jamaicans.com to have a look at the Paris Olympics. We call it our roundtable review. To my knowledge, we, as Jamaica, we haven't really done something like this as yet, and it's an absolute privilege to be part of this. Jamaicans.com, a digital media platform dedicated to the promotion and celebration of Jamaica and the Jamaicans at home and in the diaspora. Sports is where we are at. That is one of my specialities, and I'm your host. My name is Denzil Wilks. I am into the business of sports administration. Right now, I am located at the Faculty of Sports at the University of the West Indies, Mona, the Mona Academy of Sport. And up there, I manage an area called ADT, Athletic Development and Training. No, I'm not a coach. I am purely into administration, but I do have a number of coaches operating within that section. And so it's all about administration. My co host tonight is Mr. Winston Smith, a journalist himself and specifically a sports journalist. And he certainly will tell us a little bit more about himself. Winston?
Thank you very much, Denzil. My name is Winston Smith. Most people know me as Stan Smith. I'm a veteran journalist. I've written for a number of publications, including Jamaicans.com. I've covered sports here. I'm located in New York. I've covered sports, track and field in particular, for a number of years, from Drake relays to Penn relays to the Adidas games, the Reebok games. I've written on all of those. I am currently the co-host, along with Aubrey Campbell, of the sports show on Carib Zone every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. And I guess my introduction here purpose here is to really kind of be while Mr. Wilks is the sports analyst, I'm going to be the journalist, which is what I love doing, where we'll be covering the Olympics, Jamaica's participation in the Olympics and how we did, and we'll be looking at some critical issues as we go, and we'll be taking questions as well as we go along.
Certainly. Thanks, Winston. Before we go any further, we want to just apologize for the absence tonight of Don Anderson. And in fact, we can go as far as to say Dr. Don Anderson. He was just recently given an honorary doctorate by the University of the West Indies, and we congratulate him for that. He's not here because he's not so well, and of course we wish him well. And we anticipate that a time will come when we will be able to have him. This is someone who has been chef de mission to 5 different Olympics. So you can't do that without accumulating a wealth of knowledge of the kind of backroom as far as administration is concerned. But we do have with us tonight an Olympian, Dr. Gregory Haughton, man who has been to the Olympics as an athlete on 3 different occasions, and we will just now ask him to speak. We also have with us, we can call him a veteran too, administrator, Professor Rainford Wilks, epidemiologist, but tonight he is more of an administrator. This is someone who, for about 10 years, chaired the Gibson and then the Gibson Makuk Relays Organizing Committee, an athlete in his own right, way back for KC, and he just told us earlier on that his athletic career ended in university, but he has also a wealth of experience in just following track and field. So first we'll ask Dr. Haughton and then Professor Rainford Wilks to just give us an indication as to what's their take on things before I get into kind of historical context of what we are looking at. As we say, it's the Paris Olympics Roundtable Review. And Dr. Haughton, you are here in that context. All yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I was looking forward to last week, but I think this week we can still enjoy the moment. I hope Mr. Anderson feel better soon, because I really wanted to see him on the program. But as it relates to the Olympics, Paris Olympics, a lot of people were disappointed for many things. I am optimistic because I see some good things. I see the field events coming into their own. And sometimes you do need a balance. We always talk about track. And we always mention the two together, track and field. But because we're doing so well in terms of the track, it seems like we ignore the field. And I believe that we must take a balanced approach, because there are so many people out there in the field events who need the opportunity as well as those who are in the track. So I think the balanced approach, where we now see something rising. My question is there going to be a trend in the field event, since the jumpers and the throwers are doing much better? It is something that we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you very much. Professor Wilks, your take.
Thank you, Denzil. It is my privilege to be here also. And I want to begin and say a few words about my perspectives on track and field administrator. Let me say, first of all, that my philosophy behind my interest in sport is that sport is a social good, and that the sport should be leveraged in all directions and by all forces for the development not only of the individual performer, but also of the country. I have embraced certain values and attitudes regarding sports administration, and I would like to recommend them. I believe sports administration must be underpinned by transparency, professionalism, honesty, integrity, and accountability. Leadership, management, and organization of the highest quality are essential. Consensus between stakeholders should be the hallmark of all decision making. The athletes are at the center of the operations. Administrators must eschew self-aggrandizement and self-promotion. The community, fans, supporters must be kept constantly engaged, and this is to be facilitated by trained, certified, competent, and experienced communication/media practitioners. My perspective on the 2024 Olympics are as follows. Our athletes have served us well, especially in recent years, but for a very long time, since 1948 and even before that. No dynasty or win streak is going to last forever. If we are having problems or a bad run, there is no need for our athletes or their coaches, their managers, to crawl into a hole or into their shells. It's a time for a strong, visionary leadership. It's a time to draw on the love from the country. And it's a time for athletes to feel buoyed up by a support which is there, not only when they are excelling, but when they have not done that well. And finally, I would just, coming out of those perspectives, I would just like to mention a few things that trouble me regarding the 2024 Olympics. First of all, the contentiousness among stakeholders, JOA, J3A, coaches, managers. Secondly, poor communication at all levels and stages. Thirdly, Jamaica is still asking what happened at Paris 2024. That was a response I saw when I posted it at my Facebook page. From the issues around warm-up of Shelley and Fraser Price, etc. There has been no press conference since the close of the 2024 Olympics. No other sport at this level would get away with this kind of scenario following the return from Olympics. What are the issues around performances, injuries? What is the role of the press and our investigative journalism? In some jurisdictions, athletes are obliged to meet the press and would be fined if they didn't do so. And what are the immediate futures for the various athletes and the sport in general? So that's my perspective. And I believe if one chooses, it could form a framework for a discussion. But I'm open to another perspective and to any direction that this discussion. Once again, thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And for transparency, let's make it clear, we are brothers. In fact, Prof has come out, I would say, firing on all cylinders. But just before co-host Winston jumps in, just to put things a little in the historical context, Prof mentioned it, we all know that our participation at a high level in the Olympics really kicked off in about 1948. And we have had quite some successes in more recent times, but we did very well in 1948 and even better in 1952. Ups and downs, there was a long time when we didn't do so well. We got no medals in 1960, we got none in 1964. Of course, we did fairly well in 1968, and I want to hit a little point here for 1968. So we're talking about administration and we're talking about the relationship between the athletes and the administrators. We must remember that in 1968 in Mexico, members of the Jamaica team performed in white. In other words, they did not perform in the Jamaican colors. And one needs to look back at that. Michael Frey, God rest his soul, spoke significantly or extensively, I should say, about some of the difficulties then. For those of a certain vintage who can remember, the dispute had to do with the fact that one of the or it was determined that an administrator should carry the flag instead of an athlete, and that caused a standoff. So when it comes to disputes and that sort of thing, it is not new. Fast forward to the fact that we have had various stars all along, but it must be said that with all the veterans, the Merlene Otis, the Juliet Cuthberts, the Grace Jacksons, the Donald Quarry, and all of those, we really hit top gear in the late 90s, coming into the 2000s, and one could say we have hit a purple patch since 2008. And yes, the name Bolt will be prominent there, but of course, we all know it's not Bolt alone. And some of the questions that we will have to look at is, have we leveraged, and Prof. Wilks mentioned it briefly, that kind of performance and all that resulted in it, and the historical context in which we were able to get to that level, to the extent that even when Usain Bolt, who could be seen as the catalyst, left the scene, we continued to do well. And then there was, of course, COVID-19, and we ran into problems. And 2024 can very well be seen as the kind of reset of the Olympics, because as we know, things went out of whack. The 2020 Olympics were actually held in 2021, and the World Championships were impacted. So, in that context, I now ask co-host Winston to set the stage for these discussions. Our technical people have told us they will hold our feet to the fire, because we could easily go off for hours on end, but we just have an hour and a half. I encourage you out there to don't hesitate to send in your comments, your questions, and everything. And from time to time, we'll be posing questions that you can respond to. Winston, all yours.
What I'm going to start with, let's look at what happened at the Olympics. We ended up with 6 medals, 2 in track and field, and the rest, 2 in track and the rest in the field events. And of course, it has been argued that Jamaica underperformed, as our male and female athletes did not do as well in track as what was expected. Now, there are a number of issues that I think we need to look at, and I think Rainford Wilks mentioned a number of things that I was going to talk about, but I think he set the stage for us to go forward with some of the questions, the critical questions affecting athletics, the athlete support. How do we secure the legacy? You know, those kinds of questions we're going to be looking at tonight. I'm not going to speak too long. I'm just going to say the following: our track and field, in terms of the Olympics and the World Championship, because even though we didn't add that here, it's a component, because it's sort of a feeder event that helps us in a lot of ways prior to the 4 years intermitting. Jamaica has done well, but we've had our share of problems. And tonight, I think, for example, we need to look at the issues that have caused us to be where we are, because we didn't just get here and what happened in Paris just happened like that. There were some things that are there. I think that the organizations need to look at, the JOA and the J3A need to look at, and how it can be done, how things can be done better. So I'm just gonna throw it out for folks to talk about. So Dr. Haughton, I'd like to put you on the spot, because you have a podcast, and just to let folks know, Dr. Haughton has a podcast where he deals with a number of issues, and I would like to get your perspective, Dr. Haughton, on what you really thought happened with this Olympics in Paris in 24. You need to unmute.
Yes, you're okay now.
Yes. You could see the signs from early in the off season that something was going to happen. You saw it with the relays. You saw the the lack of communication, the lack of transparency. And for me, experience has taught me that when you see these things going on, it usually lead up to some other issues. And we saw it. We saw where the minister tried to bring these two entities together to see if they could work something out. And you saw how important teamwork is, because they were not able to work out the issue. And then you saw over in Paris, there were major issues in terms of the heat and no fan and no AC and hotel accommodation. And those things are never good for athletes, because athletes usually perform best when they are focused, when they have the ability to go within. And when they have to deal with some of these issues, I can tell you it usually affects them, unless the athlete is truly strong and already have their support team around them. It will have a negative impact. So from I saw all the issues before the games, and then I saw the accreditation issues, I knew something was going to go wrong. Because when you look and you see, even in Usain's boat day, once Usain started out well, the energy usually pulled everybody along. So once I saw the negative and the toxic environment and the conversations, I knew that Jamaica was up for some major issue. And then we knew going in, the 4x4 men relay wasn't ready. And we saw that the women 4x1 also had some issues. And that led to all the other, it's like a chain reaction. So I knew early that something was wrong when I saw the two entities weren't able to sit together, put aside the differences, and focus on what was best for the athletes within that small time and space.
Interesting, if I may jump in here, Winston. Thanks, and thanks, Dr. Greg. It's interesting that you also have focused on that dispute. And you are, of course, speaking with the experience of an athlete who has been there, and nobody can argue that you have some experience as to how things impact. There are views out there which suggest that these things did not really affect the athletes. That is not what caused it. But Prof. Wilks also alluded to that. And so in that context, I'm going to ask Prof. Wilks to come in here with a little bit more direct. He started off by mentioning it, but was this dispute between the two major organizations responsible for our athletes, do you think that this had a major impact on the performance of our team overall? Prof. Wilks.
Thank you, Denzil. Yes, I do think so, but anybody can think anything they want. Is it so? And we could never be absolutely sure. But as Olympian Gregory Haughton says, the signs were on the wall. First of all, we're a very small country, but even the big United States, you couldn't insulate the athletes from this kind of impact. So what are some of the examples of the impact? We hear about athletes that expected to have their individual coaches, specialist athletes, not being available. We hear that the allocation of coaches or the allocation overall of officials was not appropriately distributed. I assume that the Olympics, after all these decades, must have some standard operating procedures, must have some, and must be based on evidence, must be based on experience. Every year, I'm sure there's a review and things are looked at and tweaked as necessary. Now, I want to make one point. I alluded to it in the very background and the values. I think if I were to judge these administrators, I would say they would fail, or they do not reflect the values. And anybody can criticize the values I've put out. They do not reflect the values that I have suggested. For example, consensus between stakeholders must be the hallmark of decision makers. I am not aware, I've said it, if you can't meet together as two contending organizations, then there's something called mediation. Jamaica has a good record of mediation, and there are trained and experienced mediators. Now, there's a history of contention. So, for example, I am told, or it is in the news media, that Olympian Dr was given the list of persons, of the numbers that were to be accredited or be assigned or be made available to the various, I assume it would be the various sports, and perhaps not just track and field. I don't know whether, in fact, it was verified as to whether he carried out that duty, or there was any understanding that he made contact with the J3As in those situations. How did that go? How did the JOA decide on making that individual the messenger, or putting him in charge of something as crucial as that? Up to today, we are hearing about that the J3 was 6 short. So you have a shot putter who's been doing well. She's a lone ranger. She's the only one who is at that level for Jamaica. She has her own athlete. She has her own coach who she's used to being with. If it is at all possible, I would expect her to have her coach. You would have to demonstrate to me that it is not possible, and in which case you would need, in my opinion, be obliged to sit with her and see if you can work out some alternative. There's the issue that came out after Shelley-Ann missed that training session because of access to the warm-up session, and missed the semifinal because of access. I want to hear, for example, in that message, in that report, we hear that Shelley-Ann wasn't staying in the Olympic Village. Why was that? I have not heard of that before. I think there's something to be said for the team staying together, to buoy up each other. I remember a picture very vividly in my mind where young Seville was virtually the model, where Shelley was trying on her wig on him in the village. Those are the kind of things that build team spirit. Now, Shelley is not in the village. Where I remember Oblique running off and saying, "Oh, I'm going to help Auntie Shelley do something like that." That must have been missed, and we don't take we don't take those things for granted. Then there is the issue of our star athlete, Sharika Jackson. You hear she's going to compete, she doesn't compete, and then we never get anything out of her. To this day, we haven't heard a word from her. I don't even know when she came back into the island. So I think a blind man on a galloping horse would be able to see that there were sufficient issues that must, unless they were not human, that must have affected them. And I'm not even going to touch on the bigger issues like accommodation, lack of air conditioning, beds breaking down, all of those things. We haven't heard a word out of the chef de mission. To this day, I want to hear whether the chef de mission was informed that there was a change in access to the warm-up field, and whether he made an attempt to convey that to the athletes who were outside of the village, or even those who were in the village. So those things are smiths of what disturbed me, and I think they disturb the whole Jamaica. And then the silence and coming home is obviously affecting the future. So, yes, I think so. And yes, I think there's many pieces of evidence to support why I think so. And I think the majority of persons would agree that these are the kind of things that affect any team, from prep school teams to international teams. Team spirit, team camaraderie are crucial, and it was nowhere to be seen. I made another point, and this is my last point of this interjection. I made the point that one value that I think is crucial: administrators must not be too keen on being in the front. In fact, there are some people who feel administrators should be invisible. And the success of your administration is how well the event takes place without anybody seeing you. Jamaican administrators seem to be wanting to be the cynosure, the center of attraction. Absolute nonsense. A good administration is one which makes sure everything takes place without anybody even knows what is going on. And that, to me, last thing is accountability. To whom do these people account? The JOA, the J3A. I know the international organizations frown on government getting involved, but context is important. This is a small country. We lean on the government all the time for assistance. There is no way that any track organization is going to go abroad without government support. And while the government is not going to tell you what to do, the government somebody is going to take responsibility. These people cannot continue to behave as if they are without any reporting structure. And it will have to be decided how this matter is brought to some accounting forum and be dealt with. Because to me, and what happened over the weekend gone, where I gather that the minister was not invited to the JOA awards to athletes, and the J3A president was invited at the last minute. These are critical issues. Why would you want to do that? And I'd like to stop there.
Winston, all yours.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Since I'm the journalist here, the questions that I get, and these are questions I get from people in the diaspora here about that. Structurally, there seems to be, to Rainford's point, structurally there seems to be a breakdown institutionally in terms of just having the organizations that are responsible for putting these events together and making sure they run smoothly. There seems to be some institutional dysfunction, and you can't have success happens. Let me go back and say this. I think since 2012, I've argued in a number of public forums and on my social media that there have been some cracks in Jamaican track and field, that because of the success of Usain Bolt and Shelley and Fraser, nobody paid them much attention. And a number of things have happened. And they kind of just went by the wayside. And as is always the case, when things are going good, nobody wants to rain on the parade. So the issues aren't dealt with. And I have to agree with Rainford's point. It seems to me that my favorite phrase to my friends when we discuss this is, I have never seen a single soul turn on the television or show up at stadium for a JOA official presence or a J3 official presence. It's the athletes. So starting with that as my point, I'm arguing that somehow our athletic personnel seem to have somehow misplaced or have this notion that they are as important as the athlete. Because I've seen when we discuss, I remember a huge discussion when one of the J3 official decided to sue a particular athlete who, at the time, I think he was the second fastest in the 100 meter, and waited until the week before the trials to bring that to fore for an incident that happened almost 9 months before. Those kinds of things, and I don't want to kind of belabor it, but just the kinds of behavior. The other thing is, why is it we are doing a postmortem here, so to speak. Why have we not had the JOA and the J3A having some sort of public accountability as to a public that feels that it has been let down, even though I think we are opening a whole new vista to Dr. Greg's point in terms of field events. We're opening a vista where I think we need to support some more, and we need to encourage some more so that we can have the balance necessary. Why are we not having press conference? Why isn't there a press conference and access media people such as myself, an investigative journalist? Why isn't the president in Jamaica pressuring to have access to have answers to questions? When this forum was being put together, and I spoke with my compatriots at Jamaicans.com, one of the questions that Katie has raised to me is, we don't know what happened with Sharika Jackson. We really don't know. We haven't been given an accounting of what happened and the disappointment in the public. And from that perspective, I think we need to look at what the public, the supporting public, both in the diaspora and in Jamaica and the global community, have given to Jamaicans, and they are deserving of answers. And we, the press, are here to ask the questions, but access is not there. I see press releases. What you hear is more stories. A lot of times when I pull my information, I have to go to people like Dr. Greg's podcast to pull information, which I think should come from, quite frankly, the organizations that are there. Mr. Mills fired a salvo when he talked about the lack of support and necessary personnel for the Olympics. We heard something coming, but every coach can't go. When you look at Daniel Dodd Thomas, this lady is, I think she's a bronze medalist in the World Championship. This is a hike. She's in the top 10. Why is it not prioritized? You know, and there are a number of other issues that I don't want to go on too long about it, but that I think speaks to the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, and dare I say, to some degree, there may be some arrogance at the leadership level in thinking that they don't owe us, the public, an explanation. As a press person, I really think that the discussions that I hear here in the diaspora, especially where I am located in New York, people ask these questions daily. It's on radio shows. It's on, we need to. I think there needs to be some way in which we push to have more transparency, mandatory press conferences around events. The imbroglio with the relays, people arguing we did not get the email from J3A. The coaches did not know. Those kinds of sort of dysfunctional type of behavior, and nobody's out there answering what has happened and why we ended up where we ended up. And I'll just stop there, and somebody else can take it from there. Dr. Greg?
Yes, I want to say something, and I hope this is the right forum, because for me, I'm about development. And all of this thing that we're talking about now, it can show that there are a lot of structural development needed. And we don't know who to turn to, because as Professor Wilks talk about accountability, who is going to hold these individuals foot to the fire when they don't do some of the basic things? Like, let me give you an example. I've been shedding some light on a contract that was supposed to be that can help athletes develop in so many different ways. It could also help the country develop in so many different ways when you look on the amount of funds and where the funds would go and how the athletes would benefit. And these people turn their nose upon this contract, and they sign another contract, and you don't know nothing about the contract that they signed. You don't know who to hold accountable. You don't know when the contract was signed. And we know, well, I know that if Jamaica is going to dominate the world in any way, it starts with the grassroots program. It starts with having the right coaches. It starts with selecting the right athletes and giving them the opportunity. There are so many athletes in Jamaica who could make it and go far, but because of the lack of support and the lack of foundation, nobody seems to care. And if we don't do things like this, nobody is going to speak on behalf of those young people who have the talent and the ability, but they just need the guidance and someone to encourage them. And when I see these little things keep on happening, I want to know, who can I turn to if we see the blatant neglect? Who can we turn to? And I think when Professor Wilks talk about accountability, we need to have an ethic program in place to hold some of these people accountable and to make sure that the behaviors and the values and the morals that these institutions must display, that they are there, because it appears that they can do whatever they want. They can snub the Minister of Culture, they can snub the president of an organization, leave them off the list, they can leave off coaches, athletes, and there is nothing we can do. So I am asking Professor Wilks this question. When things like these happen, what can we do as a team to get things back on track, so the society on a whole, the athletes on a whole, the coaches on a whole can benefit? What can we do, Professor Wilks? Because I don't seem to get the answer.
All right, before Rainford jumps in, let me just say quickly, we are down the road in terms of accountability. And there is little doubt that that is a major topic. So one of the things that we want our listeners and our viewers to look at, just in terms of how athletics or how sport in fact is organized now, is this the best way possible? Because Renford alluded to it. The sporting bodies report to their international bodies. The international bodies frown on any interference from governments, and one understands the reason for that. And now Dr. Haughton has put the things squarely. Where do we turn? How do we ensure accountability in these circumstances? Is it that our hands are tied? No, I turn over. Renford, yours.
Yes, I am not a scholar of the subject, but everyone hears it, that they frown, but administrators have gone to prison. The previous IAAF, as it was then before World Athletics, I think he and his sons are either in prison or on home arrest somewhere. So we know that accountability, I think that involved money, but money is not the only thing. I don't think everything needs to be out in the public. And I also believe that most people are reasonable. I have no experience, but I have experience in terms of this, but I have experience with people. And I would say that in a small country like ours, in the same way that we have to tweak things in choosing our teams, we can't do it like the first past the post with the US with their plethora of talent. The government, and as a country, or if we want to establish a civil body, we must establish some organization that takes responsibility for our sporting organizations. And if it is necessary, and the head of a sporting organization pulls rank and say, I don't report to you, I report to the international body, I think it is incumbent on our government, knowing full well that none of this can go forward without them, must approach the international body and say that we have a problem here. We have a problem here, and we cannot do without your intervention. So I believe that there's something called diplomacy and diplomacy school, and we take these things for granted. But those persons, diplomats, there is a way in nowadays where some countries are like Trump want to do without diplomats. But I think there needs to be some work behind the scenes involving our government, civil organizations, maybe a coming together of all the Olympic sports, and to say it cannot continue like this, because what we are seeing is totally dysfunctional. It is disruptive. It is creating all kind of disunity, and we need to have some semblance of rapprochement, consensus building. And I think in our setting, knowing the history that we have, I think the government has to put itself front and center without being overbearing, without coming to conclusions and setting out rules and punishments and so on. But there needs to be some of our senior diplomats and senior sporting persons. I just love Amava Bernard, you know, Mr. Mitchell from private sector. Those are people who I just look at their behavior throughout the country and say these are people who must be able to build some consensus. But to me, it must be led by the government, because when things go wrong, the government is going to be blamed. And the government is responsible for building back the stadium. All these things we call on government. Therefore, every responsibility comes with some rights, and vice versa. If they are responsible for these things, they must have a right to intervene when things are not going according to plan. And no one should be allowed to eschew the government's involvement and rush under the wings of some international organization. It cannot be allowed in our context.
Thanks very much. We have to wrap up not the entire discussion, but of course we are trying to focus on a number of things here. And I know how engaging this is, and we could go on forever. This is a situation in which we have a JOA, a J3A, and a government, and we seem to be at odds. And what I hear coming forward is for us to find a way to bring about some level of rapprochement. We are talking about mediating. It's something that we can do. But nonetheless, we have to look at a number of other things that we have. We now had on our list of things the issues affecting, and what we are talking about affects the performance of the athlete. But is there a way in which our performance, the other issues that affect our performance, are there things that we on this panel, and of course we want the participation of our audience to say, are there other things in terms of how we are organized and how our athletes are prepared that would have also impacted? There are persons talking about the number of injuries that we have, and all of those things come. So, to you, Winston, you want to lead off on that segment of the discussion?
Yes, I would like to for us to look at, and I'm not sure I would like to see if we can look at how we can go forward with that, because you've touched on the state of the infrastructure and organizational support systems and the problems with it. Now, the state of athletics in Jamaica, as it now stands, we have the clubs, which is the primary feeders that provide us with the athletes. Then we have the institutional bodies that are responsible for coordinating around events. Now, the question for me is, how is our athlete, number one, how are athletes chosen? The process by which selection is done. I'm looking at, for example, people who are selectors, who also are club people in charge of clubs, who have their athletes, and there's a conflict between this particular club selector and his club athlete versus another athlete. How do we make sure that those kinds of things don't happen, where it's clear conflict of interest? How do we go forward with saying, do we need a more of an independent body choosing the athletes, and not people with a stake in having his or her athlete from a particular club? Those are issues that I think are critical to
Well, that's key. That's key. But let us look at it though. For a long time, we had those problems, and I remember somebody like, God rest his soul, Teddy McCook, addressing these issues. We managed to get to that stage where we moved towards what happens in the United States, meaning first past the post. And nowadays, of course, we have had to be tweaking it, as alluded to by Rainford, whereby, okay, first three, but when it comes to relays, the national body has a say in terms of how you add that extra person and all of that. And I want to put a little context here. I want us to recognize that we are now talking about the most successful sport for Jamaica internationally, without a doubt. And so there may be those who will think that, boy, how come we are bashing when this has been so successful? But that's not the point here. I think where we are is that everybody would like to see us do even better. And there are many who think that we could be doing better if we were harnessing things. I want to spend a brief moment with an analogy that I used in an article that I wrote for Jamaicans.com some time ago. And it has to do with cricket as far as the West Indies is concerned. Late 1970s, right until the early 1990s, West Indies cricket on top of the world. During that time, we lost the plot in terms of how would we sustain beyond a certain point. the Australians and some other countries, but the Australians in particular, studied what we were doing and implemented certain things. And as a result, Australia now may not be on top all the time, but they never fall to the bottom. We, in terms of West Indies, fell to the bottom in terms of cricket, coming from the very pinnacle. We are now riding a crest of success. Is the Paris situation a wake-up call to see, hey, are we losing the plot? Or is it just a lull, as Rainford mentioned, where you're not going to be at the top all the time? Or is it that we have lost the plot and we may not be doing what it is that will make us sustainable? Greg, as an athlete, how do you respond to that?
So I am happy that I got a chance to work with this question here, because I remember back in the days, they would say banana can't done, yam can't done, because we are from Jamaica. But you look now, you see we're not dominating the banana market and we're not dominating the yam market. Now, for me, it's always about the fundamentals. Are the fundamentals in place? And I know that sometimes we look at the physical talent of what is going on in Jamaica in terms of picking talent. But what we don't see is the mental approach to getting an athlete to transition from amateur into the professional. Now, if you look at, let's say, Mr. Wilks, you talk about cricket. Let's look at Australia for a minute. The bowlers are not stronger. They're not faster, but they're more intelligent. And for me, I always say that if we're going to dominate track and field in Jamaica, we have to go to the fundamentals. We have to focus on the intellect of the person. I was successful not because I was fast and strong. It was my intellect. It was how I deal with pressure. It was how I deal with conflict. It was how I put my race strategy together. And what I see now in Jamaica is that we are spending too much time focusing on the physical activities, and we're not helping the athlete to be smart, intelligent, where they can be composed under pressure. And this is why I oftentimes say that the federations need to implement programs that can help with personal development. I've been asking time and time again, can you name any program that the JOA, the J3, or any other institution put together to help the athletes in terms of personal development, help with their intellect, help with their knowledge of the game, help with their understanding of what to do? If you don't invest in the mind, you're never going to get that sustained level of success that we seek. No, it might be a little bit of luck, because the talent is there, just like with the West Indies. But what you see is that the other countries are catching up on us. You look at Africa, they're dominating the sprints now. Jamaica didn't qualify for the mile relay, and we see it been happening over and over, and we don't see what the problem is. And I'm here to say that the problem is not a physical thing. The problem is a mental thing. It's a psychological thing. And if we don't invest in the programs that can help to develop the person, the intellect, then you're just going to see things just slowly keep getting worse. And then we're going to throw more money with facilities. Look, we were dominating track and field when we only had one track, one stadium. We used to train on the grass. We used to lift water bottles, but we were still good enough because we had the ability to focus. We had the ability to tap from within. And I don't think that our people are getting it to say that we need to do more to invest in personal development. I'll leave it here for now.
Let me ask a question here, because you've touched on one aspect of it. And one of the aspects of track and field that I think is neglected is the psychological aspect, the pressure, the stress. We have seen where, for example, in our every year we see a number of athletes who shine at champs, and the biggest problem I think in our program is the transition of athletes from the schoolboy level or the junior level to the international level.
Oh, yes.
I think, and there is no program, for example, to help to add to Dr. Greg's point, with the psychological help. I see where Dr. Greg, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, where you're talking to Mr. Mills about oblique Seville, that in sort of a mentorship way. what I'm saying is I don't see anything where the athletes dealing with the pressure. Something never might often talk about. He said you don't understand what it is like to move from being a schoolboy athlete to an Olympic athlete, which I'm sure Dr. Greg can speak to. But I think that kind of a support system and helping some of these athletes, I think it's also necessary to add to what he's saying.
Denzil, there's a question. There's a question
yes.
scrolling across the bottom, and I think the audience needs to be engaged, because we're going to lose the audience if we don't at least respond. Tony, I can't remember his name right now, who sent me a message. There's a question scrolling across here now. What can be done about the going forward? What do you think should be done to improve Jamaica's performance on the global stage? I think quickly, we have said it, we need an organization. Organization begins with, structure. Not begins, organization includes structure, systems, process, and people. And Olympian Haughton mentioned all of this. I want to just touch quickly on the J3As, because while it appears that the JOA, in my opinion, is really out on a limb and is really dismissive and disrespectful of the whole country, and I'm going on record to say that, I don't think the J3A has the best organization in place. And I'm going to stand here speaking to friends of mine to say that the J3A needs to broaden, deepen, and open its organization. And I'm going to say one thing. There's absolutely no reason why in the election a few years ago, Tony Davis couldn't find a place on the executive. Tony Davis is an experienced track athlete administrator. What is so cliquish, and I use the word advisedly, why we couldn't get Tony Davis on the executive of the J3A? How does the J3A choose its executive? Is it open and transparent? Is it open to anybody? How is membership of the J3A? I believe that at this time, we need the involvement of some of our senior sporting organizers with experience to set themselves a task of creating the kind of organization, structure, systems, processes, and people. Olympian Haughton emphasized the people, both at the administration level and at the performance level, what you're going to do to develop these people. But structure, systems, processes, and people need to be the hallmark of all these bodies. And we need to know that, and it needs to be transparent for all of us to see.
I would like to ask a question here.
Go ahead, Winston.
I've spoken to a number.
We need to answer the question, though. We need to speak to what I hope you're going to include it, Winston.
Yeah, I will.
The question is what we can do to move things forward in the future. My suggestion.
My
suggestion is organization
and also
openness.
There are a number of athletes that I know that I've spoken to that would like to contribute, become part of the institutional forms that you're talking about.
Winston, I just want to say Ed Barnes has been beating that for a long time. Proceed. Sorry to interrupt.
Why isn't there an outreach to pull the former athletes? And there are a number of athletes in different areas that can contribute. Why are they not, that resource not being brought into the institutions that Rainford are talking about? Because there's a wealth of talented people with institutional memory, with institutional expertise that can bring to these organizations. I mean, just to utilize is what I'm saying. Those kinds of skill sets that is missing, that is needed, because I think it has become somewhat sclerotic in that the people that are there somehow are either bereft of ideas, and sometimes people are in a position that what happens with them is that they become comfortable, and no infusion of blood, no of new blood, new ideas. Why aren't, and I think athletes more than anybody else there should be an outreach within, especially the J3A, to have athletes coming in and contributing. That's just one side of it, I think. I don't know Dr. Greg feels about that as a former athlete.
What I think if you withhold the monies, that they will have to do what you say. And I think that they understand that all we're going to do is talk. Mm-hmm. Somebody came on my channel and they said, Greg, they're disappointed in me because all I do is talk. And I said to them that I keep on bringing up the issues and hoping that some of the stakeholders will do something about it, because that's all I can do. I can bring up the issues. I can make it more people aware of what's going on. But until influential individuals put the pressure, as Professor Wilks says, behind the scenes to make them know that the behavior is obvious. You can't do these unethical things in such an open and nothing is done about it, because what it does, it discourages the coaches, the athletes, and other people who are on the outside who really want to help. But when they see the behavior, the poor ethics, the poor morals, the poor principles, they just don't want to be a part of it. But the sad thing is that people continue to give them their monies. And I think if we hold on to the monies, they must bend and do what is in the best interest of the athletes and the country.
There's a question here that I'd like to read from A. St. Clair Davis. To foster healthier sports environment, the government should be urged to establish clear guidelines for organizational structures within the federation.
Here.
Right. Let me respond to that. And I suppose I am in a position to speak, having spent close to 10 years, in fact, more than 10 years at the Sports Development Foundation, which is the government body responsible for the development of sporting infrastructure. And it also contributes the most to the various sporting organizations. And of course, the J3A would be one of the big beneficiaries of this. And I hear what Gregory is saying in terms of withholding. That, of course, is a method that can be used. But I would prefer personally if we don't have to actually go there. Is there a way in which we can bring the people to the table? Now, let's look a little more broad than just track and field. There used to be a body known as the National Sports Council, which operated for quite some time. It hasn't met for a long time now. Now, that body was put together under PJ Patterson administration, where essentially the Prime Minister chairs that body, but the Minister with responsibility for sport actually deals with things on the ground. And that body would be constantly looking at the organizations. It didn't have the authority to determine who becomes president or anything like that, but it was much closer to things. Now, that is a body, somebody mentions a body which probably can be seen as, when we talk about civil society as far as it relates to politics, that may be one route that we can try to take, because it is most unfortunate now that we are almost at a confrontational level, given what happened over the weekend as far as the honoring of our athletes is concerned. Hardly anybody knew about what was happening. Minister not invited, J3A not invited. So you have these three entities, JOA, J3A, government, and there is no synergy. There is nothing that is taking place in terms of being really collaborative, and that is holding back things, because that also holds back your infrastructure development. The JOA has now made an announcement that they plan to spend $300 million on the preparation of athletes for the next Olympics. So, is that thumbing their noses or their nose at the rest of us to say we have money and all that sort of thing? Of course, it takes more than $300 million to prepare the athletes, but is that what we have happening here? we are in an invidious position, and our journalists, I must say, our journalists have a more prominent role to play. Why is it that for so long we have the makings of our National Sports Council? It has not operated all these years. Why don't we bring it back so that at least they can give us some kind of guidance and address some of the issues that we are addressing here? Because the issues lie not only with track and field, it's all over the sporting sector. And it is impacting on how organized the build out of our infrastructure is. And I want us also to focus on what Gregory said, the psychological aspect. I don't know any sporting body that has seemingly really bought into the need for much more attention. Whenever it comes up, we mention it, but we do not pursue it systematically. The whole issue of the psychological impact, making sure that, for example, we are producing sports psychologists, making sure that we are involving them in the program. Is any of them involved in the executive of these sporting bodies? Why are we holding back on all these things that apparently can help us? Is it just for hegemony and control?
Could I say this? Could I say this, Mr. Wilks? Because I want to kind of dissect a little bit, because I went overseas. I developed my talent, and I got my education. And when I did it at the time, because we're talking about the psychological development, when I did it at the time, Jamaica was on the verge of trying to make it. We had a group of junior athletes who all of us went overseas. And it helped in a lot of ways because it took off a lot of the burden of the federations, and we didn't have much clubs here at the time. I'm saying that to say that when I look at what is going on, and I heard Mr. Mills says that 5% of the athletes who go pro out of high school, he said that 5% chance that they have to make it. So it means that every 10 individuals that leave, 10% of that is 1.5, let's say approximately that amount that would make it. And I'm saying that to say, because a lot of times in order for we to move forward as a country, that we can always keep our athletes in Jamaica. Sometimes it's good to have the talent who are late bloomers to go overseas to develop. If you look at the throwers, 90% of the throwers who won an Olympic medal for Jamaica, all of them went overseas because it seemed like the technical things we don't have all of that here. So it's easier to utilize the American system. But today we find that a lot of coaches and administrators believe that we should stay home. And I find that when the athletes stay home, if majority of us stays home, it's going to affect our development. Because for me, college helped with the socialization, it helps with the development. I couldn't make it in the pros if I had gone in right out of high school. So I am somewhat concerned now based on what I see. And I would love to have all of your opinion on, do you think it's a good thing to stay, or do you think it's a good thing to go overseas?
I want to lead on that one, I want to lead on that one because it has been so much of a focus. In fact, I should say I am still in the process of discussing the possibility of us really researching that issue, which I refer to as the transition. We are producing a plethora of athletes coming out of, we start them off from basic school nowadays, and they go all the way to primary, and champs, of course, is the biggest thing of its sort on the planet. And then we produce all these high quality athletes seemingly, and then a minuscule amount of them make that transition to the professional levels. It's been going on from a long time ago, Gregory. In fact, this is a dicey topic because many people blamed that going away because what was happening is that many of the athletes were being overused at the universities, and they were not thinking of them from the perspective of them being representatives of their country, but utilizing them to win all the accolades and that sort of thing. And I have had some serious discussions with one example. I remember Seymour Newman, who held the 800-meter record for 45 years. And we are going to be doing some expose from some discussions that we have had with him right on Jamaicans.com. And he gave us examples of what can only be described as overuse. Then, if you get into the statistical thing, you will find that since more of our athletes have stayed home, we have done better in terms of our medal count. But where I want to agree with you to some extent, I don't think we are yet at the stage where we can say nobody goes abroad, everybody stays here. I think there's always going to be the need for some kind of balance, because there are ways in which we can ensure that when our athletes get into the universities and the colleges overseas, somebody's there saying to them, hey, don't kill this one. Make sure you are preserving him or her for national development. So it's a dicey subject, but we need data from real research. And
I can say, Mr. Wilks, that I am a specialist in that area. Okay. On my show, Let's Talk, one of the things I do when I do the interviews, I design the questions in a way where I can extract the data. And I ask almost every professional who made it at the highest level, what was the transition like from high school to college and from college to the pros? And you can go back and watch the interviews and they'll tell you. Now, what we need to focus on when we send people overseas, you see, there is a system that we have in Jamaica where we do favors for coaches over there. So we don't send the athletes to the school, the institution that can help them to develop best. We send them to a friend over here. We send them to the coach over there. We send them to an inexperienced coach who's trying to make it, hoping that we could give favors. And that is why we are losing a lot of the athletes. What we have to do is we have to make sure that when we send an athlete overseas, Mr. Wilks, I run 44/7 my freshman year in high school because I went to a school that would help me to develop academically and physically. And then when I transitioned to the university level, we already had an agreement in place that this is one of Jamaica's best. You have to take care of him. Mm-hmm. And it was done. So what I'm saying here when I said I'm a specialist, I see where the athletes are going. And I know that it is not in their best interest to go there. But if you look closely, you will see that the athletes don't make the decision for themselves. So you would have to blame the handlers who send them somewhere that they should not be. But we can open up the floor. We can have the conversations.
Let me say something quickly on this.
Yes,
and the answer is, I don't have the answer. I think it's a complex issue. You have talked about a research project that should have taken place and didn't take place to help us understand this. What I would like to say is that these are the matters that we should see being discussed by the JOA, by the J3A, and all the other sports. These are the issues that should be exercising our minds, because the truth is probably always somewhere in between. But these are the matters for discussion and decision. And I'm sure you'll find a psychologist who will say, overseas is not good for this one because of some personal trait. And it's going to come down to that. But I would like to be in a milieu, in a situation, in a country where these are the matters that exercises the minds of our administrators, our leaders, rather than who is going to the next Olympics as a member of the coaching staff or as a member of the administrative staff. You know, who is going to get the kudos, who is going to get the favors. The thing must be open, wide. The issues at hand must be identified. Call in the necessary competencies and skills to discuss them. What we have in Jamaican sports are a set of self-perpetuating cliques who have totally forgotten the interest of, and I prepared to take the backlash of this, self-perpetuating cliques that have ignored what is the real gravamen of the development of sports in the country, and it needs to stop. it needs to stop. All of these organizations must come under some scrutiny from their athlete selection to their money spending to who goes and who gets accredited to go to a sporting event. All of these matters need to become public. The administrators must no longer be the center. The athlete is the center. The administrator is there to perform a facilitatory role.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me say one quick point.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Wilks? Because
all right, before you go, let me put things in context internally now. We are almost at the end of our session. It's been extremely engaging, but please, let's keep it very brief. A quick question from Winston and then Gregory.
Just an additional point, because I know I worked for a time as a community rep for Air Jamaica, and I got to know what we have is an untapped resource here where a lot of the high schools have alumni associations here. And I remember particularly one from Kingston College who had an athlete that was coming up, and they were members of that Kingston College Old Boys Association who actually scouted the university and made sure that when the athlete got there, the kinds of things we're talking about here was in place for that athlete. And I think some of that it's an aside point, but I think it can be done in terms of just accessing, helping an athlete to adjust and picking the schools that they can go to.
Critical question, and one of the questions that our audience can look at: is there a role for the J3A in that sort of a thing? Is the J3A tapping into these organizations, your KC Old Boys, your Calabar Old Boys, your various Old Boys, your Excelsior, if you don't mind me, Greg, right? Is the J3A tapping into that and establishing that kind of relationship in order to protect the athlete? Greg, you had something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Mr. Smith says. You said that you want to do the research. So what I want you to do, Mr. Wilks, when you do the research, because I saw the trend years ago when everybody stayed in Jamaica with Usain Bolt, and I saw that it got overwhelming for the clubs because they really didn't have the money. And what we didn't see when we look at the situation is how many athletes who had the potential, who needed a little bit more time to develop, didn't make it because the funds wasn't there, and the athletes were coming out of school so fast that they couldn't sustain that growth. And then you'd have to ask yourself, how much money it is going to take to develop 1,000 athletes a year in terms of the things that Mr. Smith is asking, food and clothes and shelter and all of these things. And when you look at it, you will see that Jamaica cannot sustain it, and that's why it is important to have other areas that you can send some of the slower developed athletes over there, so by the 2 years they can come back to Jamaica if they want. And it is crucial, Mr. Wilks, that we look at that, because you find that some of the coaches want the athletes to stay to advance themselves, even though it is destructive to the younger talent, need the opportunity to go get the education.
Right.
Denzil, quickly, Denzil. Then that model that Gregory's put is used everywhere in the medical profession.
Absolutely.
We train all these specialists in Jamaica.
Absolutely.
We farm them out. What I want to see is the structure, the systems, the collaboration between all these organizations where we can come to the best decision about these matters, rather than a set of cliques handing out goodies to each other and not paying the athlete's interest the best attention. I feel very strongly about that.
I don't know that you could say
questions. What we want is the structure that is going to lead us into a situation where we take objective decisions based on data, based on collaboration, and get the athlete to the center as an individual and as groups. The athletes to the center of our thinking, of our planning, of everything. And administrators play their roles in a transparent way with responsibility.
One of the questions, before you go, Winston, one of the questions that needs to be answered, you see, is having had this forum, and by the way, there were some persons who contemplated, why didn't we have a representative of the J3A or the representative of the JOA? That was not for this one. This one was for airing this. The question now is, do we have a sequel or a number of sequels to this, because we haven't even scratched the surface and we have been given the signals that we have to wrap. A big question that we need to answer, which is a little off what we have been discussing, why we have been so focused only on the sprints. When I go back to Seymour Newman and how well he did in that 800 meters, why don't we have more successful people there? It's not rocket science. There must be a way in which we can do as well there too. But that's for another time. Winston, you had something before?
No, I was just about to read the question. Why there was a question here that says, why don't we have a middle distance program?
Okay.
And Seymour wasn't the first one then, so there's a name which escapes me now. He died recently.
Is that Mighton?
Excelsior, man. Mighton.
Never Mighton.
We have a long history of talent in that area. It just has not been followed up.
Byron Dice was another international figure that we had there. Yes. In fact, let's remember, Arthur Wint got a medal in 1952 in the 800 meters.
Absolutely.
So no, I speak of Newman because of the 45 years that he held the record. In fact, the fact that he had the record for such a long time, and he said this in his interview, is that he was so disappointed because this record should have been broken long ago. So rather than, preening himself that he had this record for so long, that record should not have held for so long, But that's for another program.
And remember that we've always had success in middle distance from 48 going forward. And you are right. This is something Never Mighton actually brought to the J3 and wanted to have one, but was never able to. So hopefully going forward, we'll be able to have that.
So there's question and answer now. There have been some questions that have come across, and I must say we have answered a number of them. I was looking at the questions rolling across while the discussions were going on, and I think we are pretty much on point. But the questions are here. It is. There has to be a part 2 of this forum, please, and that is answering one of the things that we were asking as we planned this thing. We said, boy, because the fact that Don wasn't able to be here is a good reason for another one, which gives him a chance. As I said, 5 times chef de mission. Rainford he clearly came well armed, and he came firing on all cylinders. And that description, that cliquism, it may sound harsh, but let us examine it. Isn't that what has been taking place? And have our athletes, and it's beyond track and field, because I've had the experience with other ones, are our athletes being placed at the center rather than the administrators beating their chest? George Carr, I see that name there, another outstanding 800-meter runner, 1 medals at the Commonwealth Games. So I see definitely part 2. I see the comments and the questions coming in quick and fast. This has been quite a session. I'm going to give all the panelists a chance to basically have a kind of final say, and it's not really final because we quite likely will call on you again. Let me start with my co-host, Winston.
Before I go to that, there's something in the chat there that says we should look at supporting and celebrating our athletes in terms of recognition. And this is something we talked about before, in terms of just looking at the way in which small little St. Lucia and Dominica have, since the Olympics, and I've been following it, been celebrating the accomplishments of Julian Alfred and Thea Lamont Gadsden. And Roger Stoner, I think Stoner is his name, the young man, the Olympian, that said he looked at that and felt that why is it Jamaica isn't doing the same thing? So I think this is something that we can't get into it because we're running out of time, but I think making athletes feel appreciated for what they have done. And, I think this is something that we need to look into. And my final comments in closing is saying that we've covered a lot of ground, and we need more of these kinds of forums to really become a pressure valve for the people that are in the positions that they move. Because I think educating the public is a big part of what this forum is doing. And I think that's where we need to go, so that the pressure can come from below up to the people, and hopefully the people who are in positions to do something about it are hearing what is being said here and will act on it.
All right, Gregory, your time, and then we allow Rainford to. have
Yes,
the
for me, it's always about honesty. It's about integrity. And I find that when you have leaders who are not honest, you don't see a lot of integrity, you don't see a lot of transparency, then you will never get the results that you seek. I think that if we put the athlete's best interests first, then everybody else will benefit. But oftentimes, we talk the talk, we see the evil being done over there, nobody wants to address it, nobody seems to care. And I've always said that athletes are a special population. I call them the vulnerable population because they cannot help themselves. And because they're not able to help themselves, they depend on other people to help them. And then other people usually exploit the talent and then dump them and go and move on to the next. And I'm saying that if we want our country to move forward the right way, we have to be honest. We have to make sure that the systems are in place. We have to make sure that the people are in place. Jamaica is a small place. We have talent, but we need to find these talent, encourage these talents, and put everyone together to work. It's going to take a team in order to get us to dominate the track and field world, or to sustain what we have. And if we're not honest with everyone and ourselves, it will never happen.
Thank you. Rainford?
Thank you. I will not repeat anything I said earlier. I want to see press conferences by the JOA and the J3A. I think they must open themselves for scrutiny. I want to see press conferences featuring Fraser Price, Sharika Jackson, everybody. I want all of these people to know that we love them. I have called Bruce James on a Sunday morning. I'm coming from church and he's coming from church. I said, Bruce, why aren't we seeing these people? Where are they? When did they come back into the island? I call on all these organizations that have anything to do with track athletics to come to the public and answer the questions that we have about what took place in Paris, but that is only a flashpoint. Tell us, what are your plans for moving the sport forward? And perhaps the most important question, what are your plans to develop collaboration between stakeholders? And if China and the US can speak, then I don't see why the JOA and the J3A cannot speak. I've called two names who I've admired. Marva Bernard is somebody I know personally. She's my church sister. Howard Mitchell, I know much less well. But in my opinion, reading the newspapers from, and we also have what you call it there, a mediation unit in this country. We must get these stakeholders together. They must come and expose themselves and stop thumbing their noses at us and tell us what went on in Paris, what lessons have they learned, and how are we going to move forward. That is my call on this country, and we must insist that they do it.
Thank you very much. I could not have asked for more. This has gone beyond my expectations. It has been much easier to keep it flowing. In fact, it's overflowing. To address that last point that Rainford addressed, where I live, right next door to me, there's a little dog. He's called Optimus. And a cat has migrated into the yard. And I now see them living in the most loving way, the puss and the dog. I see no reason why intellectuals like us, because that's what we have, at the levels of JOA, J3A, government, cannot find a way to come together. And as we have said, and we end on this note, placing the athletes at the forefront, backing away, pushing the egos aside, and being the facilitators that we need to be. I want to thank you all for blessing us, your panelists in particular, but of course, those who have participated. We have gotten the message from you, and one of the strongest messages that we must have another session, and it may be even more than one, because this has gone beyond our expectations. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful evening, and we thank all of those. We must thank Kadia Francis, who has put this all together on behalf of Jamaicans.com. We wish Don Anderson a speedy recovery, and we will have him on as soon as possible. And when the time is right, we will have, as long as they are prepared, representatives from the J3A, from the GOA, and yes, from government speaking on fora like this so that we can keep the pressure up. It's all in the interest of Jamaica. Thank you very much. Over and out.
All right. Thank you very much.
Remember, we're to stay on, remember.
Oh.